Why did those who owned half the world wake up every morning feeling an unbearable burden? We are accustomed to thinking of the Victorian era as a time of absolute triumph, endless balls, and the golden age of British power. However, behind the facade of exquisite mansions lay a reality that would make modern people shudder with horror. The life of the elite of that time was not only a privilege, but also an endless marathon of difficult trials. Watch the video to the end, and you will learn how social status turned into a golden cage full of physical discomfort and psychological oppression. To begin with, I will reveal a secret that completely changes the perception of this era. Being rich in Victorian England meant completely giving up your personal space and the right to be natural. Every gesture and every word of a member of the elite was subject to the harshest control by society. A mistake in choosing a topic of conversation could lead to instant social ostracism. Reputation in those days was worth much more than life itself. The fear of public disgrace haunted noble people even in their own dreams. Any rumor could ruin a gentleman's career or deprive a lady of the chance for a decent marriage. Public life required constant tension that never let up for a single minute. Constantly maintaining the image of an ideal person led to deep psychological exhaustion. It was customary to carefully hide any fatigue behind a polite and cold smile. Sincerity was considered a sign of weakness and bad taste in high society. People turned into living decorations to demonstrate their own high status. Every morning began with thoughts of how not to make a fatal mistake. High society resembled a battlefield where glances and hints were weapons. Lunch with friends turned into a rigorous test of propriety. No one could afford to relax, even behind the closed doors of their office. Wealth imposed obligations that could not be ignored without losing one's position. You had to live up to the expectations of thousands of people who did not even know you. Individuality was sacrificed for the sake of preserving family prestige and centuries-old traditions. It was like living in a transparent aquarium under the constant scrutiny of critics. Free time was spent maintaining relationships that were often burdensome. You were obliged to smile at those whom you sincerely despised deep down. Etiquette did not allow you to show your true feelings, even in the most difficult situations. Suppressed emotions accumulated inside for years, turning into severe depression. Nobles often felt like slaves to their own family name and accumulated wealth. Huge estates required management that took all their strength and energy. Every decision had to take into account the interests of future generations and the glory of their ancestors. Personal desires always came last. Victorian morality created invisible walls that were impossible to overcome. You lived according to a script written long before you were born. Any attempt to show character was perceived as a dangerous rebellion against the foundations of society. Life consisted of endless musts and almost complete must-nots. Social conventions penetrated even the most intimate spheres of human existence. Relationships between spouses often remained cold and formal for decades. Children saw their parents for only a few minutes a day during formal dinners. Warmth and sincerity were rare in these luxurious interiors. Do you think such a life can be considered a fair price to pay for wealth? Share your opinion in the comments because we are very interested in hearing your point of view. And be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new exciting historical research. Want to know a secret that will completely change your perception of the comfort of that time? The huge mansions we see in movies were actually real cold traps. Heating technology lagged catastrophically behind the architectural ambitions of the wealthy builders of those years. Even dozens of fireplaces could not fully heat the halls with their huge ceilings. The owners of these fortunes spent long winters wrapped in heavy layers of woolen clothing. Drafts were a constant companion in these majestic and gloomy buildings. They easily penetrated through the cracks in old windows and massive doors. People literally froze in their magnificent living rooms decorated with gold. The dampness from the stone walls ruined expensive tapestries and caused illness. Fireplaces provided warmth only to those who sat close to the fire itself. Even then, their backs remained cold due to the icy air in the rooms. The temperature in bedrooms often dropped to critical levels on winter nights. Bathrooms in those days were considered a place of real hardship. Hot water was a great luxury that was difficult to deliver to the upper floors. Cold water and icy air made hygiene procedures extremely unpleasant. Even the richest people washed much less often than we can imagine. During formal dinners, guests often sat without removing their outer clothing. They tried to hide their shivering from the cold with small talk and jokes. It was almost impossible to heat the huge dining rooms to a comfortable temperature. Ice could even form on the inside of the window panes. Servants constantly carried heavy buckets of coal up the endless staircases of the houses. However, this fuel was barely enough to keep the fireplaces in the offices burning. Smoke often flowed back into the rooms, filling them with a pungent and unpleasant odor. Clean air was as rare as real warmth in the home. Lung diseases became a real curse for the inhabitants of these stone bags. Constant dampness and cold undermined the immunity of even the strongest gentlemen. Chronic coughing was considered almost normal for the winter period in England. The medicines of that time did not cope well with the consequences of constant hypothermia. The architecture of the houses was designed for grandeur rather than the comfort of the residents. Huge windows provided little light on short winter days, but they were excellent at letting heat escape. Long corridors turned into veritable wind tunnels for icy winds. Living in such a house meant waging a constant war with the climate. Many aristocrats preferred to spend the winter traveling in warmer parts of Europe. Those who stayed at home became hostages in their own ancestral homes. They slept under mountains of heavy blankets, trying to retain what little body heat they had. The morning began with an icy wash from a porcelain jug on the table. This daily struggle with the cold exhausted the body and greatly depressed the spirit. The luxury of the interiors could not compensate for the lack of basic physical comfort. In the next chapter, you will learn how clothing turned every movement into a feat. Are you ready to hear the truth about fashion that crippled people? You definitely haven't heard about this unique feature of elite life in textbooks. The Victorian wardrobe was an instrument of voluntary and severe restriction of freedom. Men were required to wear starched collars that literally cut into their delicate skin. They made it difficult to breathe normally and prevented them from turning their heads freely. Women's fashion required the use of incredibly complex and heavy, multi-layered structures. The weight of a complete lady's outfit could reach 10 kilograms or even more. The rigid frames of the skirts made it impossible to pass through ordinary narrow doorways. Every movement required precise calculation and considerable physical effort. Tight corset lacing squeezed internal organs throughout the long day. Women often fainted simply because they were unable to take a deep breath. It was believed that perfect posture was more important than a person's health and well-being. Ribs could become deformed under the constant pressure of whalebone and fabric. The process of getting dressed took several hours and required the help of several servants. A person was completely deprived of any independence in everyday and personal matters. You couldn't just change your clothes if you felt uncomfortable or too hot. Clothing dictated the rules of behavior from early morning until late at night. In summer, heavy fabrics turned any walk into a real torture. The lack of ventilation led to dangerous overheating of the body under layers of wool. The dark colors of the suits actively attracted the sun's rays during daytime outings. The rules of propriety forbade even removing gloves or hats on the street. Shoes were also not particularly comfortable and were often too narrow. Gentlemen suffered from the stiff leather of their boots, which rubbed their feet raw. Ladies were forced to walk on unstable heels over the uneven cobblestones of the city. Physical pain became a familiar backdrop to any social event of the time. Even when relaxing at home, clothing did not allow a person to completely unwind. There were special home outfits that were only slightly lighter than formal wear. You always had to be ready for a sudden visit from uninvited guests. An unbuttoned button was considered the height of indecency and a serious insult to those around you. The fashion of the time was aimed at completely suppressing the natural contours of the body. It created an artificial silhouette that was considered the standard of beauty and nobility. People turned into living mannequins, deprived of the ability to run or walk quickly. The stiffness of movement emphasized high social status and an idle lifestyle. Fabrics were often dyed with dangerous chemicals that caused skin irritation and itching. Arsenic was used to produce a fashionable bright green color in women's dresses. Beauty literally demanded sacrifices, which sometimes led to death. Human health was sacrificed to fleeting trends and public opinion. It was the physical embodiment of social discipline through clothing and accessories. The body became an object of endless manipulation for the sake of a dubious external effect. Please like this if you think that modern fashion has become much more humane towards people. We appreciate your support and interest in history. What you are about to learn will truly make you look at the most ordinary dinner and everyday life of that era in a new light. The system of rules of conduct in Victorian society reached a truly frightening and almost absurd level of complexity. It resembled a minefield that people were forced to navigate every day, with no room for error. A single wrong gesture, glance, or word could lead to social ruin. There were thousands of minor and contradictory rules for every possible situation in life, from morning greetings to how exactly one should leave a room. The slightest deviation from these norms was instantly noticed by everyone present. Society was trained to observe and condemn. Any inaccuracy was interpreted as a sign of poor upbringing, inner licentiousness, or even moral weakness. People lived in a state of constant anxiety, afraid of making a mistake in front of a critical audience. This fear became the backdrop of life, which no one fought against anymore. Even within the close circle of the family, cold formality and rigid distance prevailed. Home was not a place of freedom. Children were forbidden to show sincere emotions, talk loudly, or ask uncomfortable questions in front of adults. The father was perceived as a strict judge and head of the hierarchy, rather than a close and caring person. The family atmosphere resembled an institution with a strict routine and unspoken rules. Over time, the art of conversation turned into a tedious exchange of empty but impeccably correct phrases. It was forbidden to touch on any topics that could cause controversy, embarrassment, or strong emotions. Politics, money, personal feelings, and doubts were under an unspoken ban. The living meaning of words dissolved behind a pile of polite phrases, apologies, and formalities. People could talk for hours without saying anything really important to each other. From an early age, children were taught to suppress any natural desires and impulses. They were taught to sit still for hours during receptions, dinners, and visits. Spontaneity was considered a dangerous quality that needed to be eradicated as early as possible. The child's personality was gradually broken under the pressure of social expectations and endless prohibitions. Obedience was valued above happiness. Such a life required tremendous willpower and constant strict self-control. There was no room for jokes that might seem inappropriate or ambiguous to someone. Every smile had to be measured, moderate, and appropriate to the moment. Even facial expressions were subject to unwritten rules. People gradually turned into mechanisms that performed a memorized social program. At the dinner table, it was impossible to simply enjoy the food or the company of loved ones. One had to remember which knife to use for fish and which for game, which hand to hold the fork in, and when it was acceptable to take a sip of water. The order in which dishes were served was strictly regulated and never changed. A mistake in the use of cutlery could become a topic of discussion and ridicule for weeks to come. Even funerals turned into carefully planned performances with strict rules of conduct. There were different degrees of mourning, each of which required specific clothing, facial expressions, and manner of speech. A person was obliged to mourn for exactly as long as custom dictated. Ending mourning too early was considered cruel, and ending it too late was considered suspiciously theatrical. High society closely monitored every visit, acquaintance, and invitation. You couldn't just invite a new person into your home. They had to be officially introduced and approved. Letters of recommendation were the only pass to the closed world of the empire's elite. Without them, you remained an outsider, even if you had money and status. This system of total control made life predictable and manageable, but it deprived it of joy and spontaneity. It erected artificial walls between people, preventing them from truly getting close to each other. Etiquette became a cage from which it was impossible to escape. But were the problems limited to rules of behavior, or did much heavier and more destructive pressures lurk behind closed doors? The daily routine of a wealthy Victorian was scheduled down to the minute and did not belong to him. Mandatory courtesy visits took up almost all of his free time during the social season. Refusal to participate in social life was perceived as an open challenge to the whole of society. It could lead to the instant collapse of a career or important marriage plans. People were obliged to spend huge sums of money to maintain a prestigious lifestyle. Often these expenses exceeded the family's actual income, leading to debt. Evenings were spent in stuffy halls among people to whom the host was indifferent. Social connections were not a source of support, but an instrument of mutual strict control. Loneliness in those days was considered a very suspicious and even dangerous quality. The desire for solitude was perceived by those around as a sign of serious mental disorder. You had to be constantly visible to your social circle. Personal time was a luxury that almost no one could afford. The constant need to meet the expectations of others deprived life of its true flavor and meaning. Wealth only increased the number of chains that bound a person to their social class. This endless series of formalities turned the years of life into a dreary routine. Even holidays were perceived as hard work to maintain connections and image. You were required to attend church, even if you did not believe in God. Religion was part of a social contract that could not be broken publicly. Your absence from Sunday service immediately became a topic of condemnation by your neighbors. Your moral character had to be impeccable in the eyes of the parish and society. Charity was also an obligatory part of the life of every wealthy gentleman or lady. You had to donate money to shelters and hospitals for the sake of your reputation. Often this was done not out of the goodness of your heart, but for the sake of social approval. Public reports of donations were an important tool of influence in the city. Managing an estate required constant attention to detail and endless meetings. You were responsible for the lives of hundreds of tenants and hired workers. Any conflict on your land could reflect on your good name. It was hard administrative work, hidden behind a facade of leisure and relaxation. Letters were another form of social obligation that took up a lot of precious time. You had to respond to every invitation or greeting card personally. Maintaining extensive correspondence was considered a sign of politeness and good manners in society. The stack of envelopes on the table never diminished, demanding constant attention. Gentlemen's clubs were places where the rules of etiquette were even more strictly observed. Important political and financial issues were decided there in a closed mail company. Leaving the club meant social death and the loss of all business contacts. You were obliged to spend your evenings there, even if you wanted to stay at home. Thus, the life of the elite consisted of endlessly performing a variety of boring roles. Freedom was just a pretty word that had no bearing on the reality of that existence. Wealth gave power over others, but took away power over one's own destiny. A person became a hostage to the system that he himself helped to maintain. This is what really happened in the shadows of the luxurious interiors of mansions. Despite their outward prosperity, Victorian homes were full of hidden tensions and conflicts. Marital problems were carefully concealed behind the facade of a demonstratively perfect and happy family. Any scandal could lead to complete exclusion from the guest list. Living under the constant scrutiny of servants added another layer of daily discomfort. Every conversation in the dining room could be overheard by the curious ears of the household staff. Every letter in the study could be secretly read in the absence of the owner. The need to keep up appearances in front of the servants required enormous restraint from people. Home comfort was more of a myth than a reality for most wealthy families. The home was an office for displaying status, not a place to relax. The inability to be oneself, even in the bedroom, led to alienation. This constant pretense gradually destroyed sincerity in relationships between loved ones. Children were often raised by nannies and saw their parents only on a schedule. They grew up in the strict and emotionally cold atmosphere of the large rooms of a mansion. The lack of parental love was compensated for with expensive toys and a strict classical education. This gave rise to new generations of people who did not know how to express their feelings. Secret vices flourished behind the closed doors of respectable and honorable homes. Alcoholism and drug addiction were frequent companions of the bored aristocracy of the empire. Unable to express their emotions openly, people sought oblivion in chemicals. These facts were carefully hushed up in order to preserve the honor of the family name and lineage. Financial difficulties were also a frequent cause of hidden suffering among the wealthy people of that time. Maintaining a huge staff of servants in an estate required enormous and constant expenses. Many families lived in debt, trying to the last to maintain the appearance of former prosperity. The fear of ruin was a constant backdrop to their outwardly glamorous lives. Financial difficulties were also a frequent cause of hidden suffering among the wealthy people of that time. Maintaining a huge staff of servants in an estate required enormous and constant expenses. Many families lived in debt, trying to the last to maintain the appearance of former prosperity. The fear of ruin was a constant backdrop to their outwardly glamorous lives. Women in these homes often felt like goldfish in an aquarium. They had no right to their own opinion or to dispose of their personal money. Their main task was to decorate the house and give birth to healthy heirs. Boredom and lack of purpose in life often led to nervous breakdowns. Men bore the burden of responsibility for preserving and increasing family capital and influence. Any failure in business was perceived as a personal, disgraceful defeat in front of the whole world. They were forced to spend their days in offices they sincerely hated for the sake of duty. Life turned into an endless struggle to maintain an illusory high status. The death of loved ones was mourned according to strict rules that did not allow true grief to be expressed. You had to wear black and observe silence for a set period of time. Sincere tears were considered a sign of weakness, unworthy of a member of your high social class. Mourning became yet another formal ritual of social behavior. How difficult do you think it was to keep such secrets throughout one's life? The Victorian home was not a fortress, but a theater with very cruel rules. Are you ready to find out why they deliberately sought to appear sickly and weak? During that era, there was a strange cult of appearance that encouraged unhealthy paleness. A healthy glow and strong physique were considered signs of low birth and labor. The elite sought to look emaciated in order to emphasize their refinement and high status. A sickly appearance became a symbol that a person did not need to work with their hands. To achieve the desired effect, people restricted their food intake and movement. They avoided sunlight, spending their days in the shade of thick, heavy curtains. This led to real physical weakness, which was perceived as a sign of aristocracy. Constant weakness and fainting spells became an obligatory part of a complex social ritual. Women deliberately used dangerous lead-based cosmetics to whiten their skin. This caused serious poisoning and ruined their natural complexion for many years. Men also strove for thinness, considering it a sign of high intelligence and spirit. Beauty at that time was inextricably linked to the concept of illness and weakness. Melancholy was considered the most fashionable and noble mood for a young gentleman or lady. Smiles and loud laughter were perceived as vulgar and characteristic of the common people. You had to look as if you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. Sadness in the eyes was a mandatory accessory for any formal portrait. Lack of physical activity led to muscle atrophy and constant body aches. Sports were considered an activity for plebeians, unworthy of the attention of a true noble gentleman. Walks were slow and short so as not to cause unwanted redness of the face. People voluntarily turned themselves into fragile and lifeless porcelain figurines. Even the diet of the elite was aimed at maintaining this artificial and dangerous pallor. The use of vinegar was considered a good way to get rid of unwanted healthy skin color. Many young people ruined their stomachs for the sake of a dubious ideal of fashionable beauty. The consequences of such experiments often stayed with them for the rest of their lives. The fashion for sickliness even permeated the literature and art of that great era. The heroines of novels constantly suffered from inexplicable ailments and subtle mental anguish. This created a cultural backdrop in which health seemed crude and uncouth. Young people imitated these characters, trying to appear weaker than they were. Tuberculosis was called the romantic disease in those days because of the pallor it caused. People did not understand the danger of infection and even romanticized the symptoms of this terrible disease. A feverish gleam in the eyes was considered the height of attractiveness in the city's high society salons. It was a tragic delusion that cost the lives of thousands of young and talented people. The pursuit of the ideal led to a complete loss of connection with the natural needs of the body. People perceived their bodies as enemies that needed to be constantly subdued and restricted. Wealth made it possible to buy the best food, but fashion forbade eating it. Life turned into voluntary fasting for the sake of recognition by high society. This aesthetic of suffering was the logical conclusion of the entire Victorian system of personal development. If the spirit must rule over the body, then the body itself must appear weak. Sickliness became a visual code of belonging to the highest caste of chosen people. It was a high price to pay for the right to be considered a true aristocrat of the spirit. The education and interests of the elite were strictly limited by the boundaries of propriety at the time. These boundaries were defined by tradition, religion, and fear of change. Any intellectual curiosity was suppressed if it touched on forbidden or controversial topics. Even a cautious interest in new ideas could be perceived as bad form. Society sought to raise people who did not think, but were convenient and predictable. Particularly harsh restrictions applied to women. Women were strictly forbidden from studying serious sciences in depth, leaving them with only superficial skills. They were allowed to learn music, the basics of drawing, or a foreign language, but only at a level that would serve to embellish conversation. It was believed that excessive knowledge could damage the delicate female mind and character. Any attempt to go beyond these boundaries was perceived as a threat to public order. Men were trapped in the vice of classical education, focused on Latin and Greek. From an early age, they were taught to memorize texts and rules rather than understand the world around them. This education often had no connection to the reality of a rapidly changing world. Industrialization and scientific progress were advancing, but education remained stagnant. Any original thought was perceived as a dangerous threat to the established stability of noble society. The manifestation of independent thinking could ruin a career and reputation. It was more important to be able to quote ancient authors than to have your own opinion. Knowledge became a form of status demonstration rather than a tool for understanding life. Reading books was strictly censored within the family and social circles. Parents and relatives kept a close eye on what young people had access to. Many contemporary novels were considered too liberal and were banned from being read by young ladies. Even a hint of strong feelings or social conflict was frowned upon. Discussing sensitive social or political issues in living rooms was strictly taboo. Only safe and empty topics were allowed at the table. This created an atmosphere of intellectual stifling and stagnation in even the wealthiest homes. The outward glamour hid a complete lack of lively thought and honest conversation. People with lively minds felt trapped in a narrow space of dogma. They clearly saw the contradictions between reality and the official picture of the world. They had to hide their true interests in order to maintain their reputation as respectable people. Sincerity could be too costly. Scientific discoveries such as Darwin's theory caused real shock and active rejection. They undermined familiar religious and moral ideas. Society sought to preserve the familiar picture of the world at any cost, ignoring the facts. New ideas were declared dangerous and their supporters were condemned. Conversations at dinner resembled a ritual dance where every step was known in advance. There were unspoken rules about what could and could not be said. You couldn't ask a profound question or initiate a serious and important discussion. Any deviation from the norm caused awkwardness. Superficiality became a defense mechanism, allowing people to avoid any possible conflicts and quarrels. People learned to talk a lot without saying anything important. Intelligent people often pretended to be mediocre so as not to stand out from the crowd. It was a form of self-defense in a harsh social environment. Art was also under pressure from strict moral norms and certain rules. Artists and writers were told which topics were acceptable and which were not. Artists had to depict the world as idealized and devoid of any crude details of life. Reality was deliberately smoothed over. Travel abroad was often limited to visits to the same fashionable resorts. These were perceived more as a change of scenery than as a way of learning about the world. Aristocrats socialized only with their own circle there, ignoring the culture of other countries. Contact with the local population was minimal. They brought their habits, food, and even prejudices with them to any part of the world. Foreign culture remained a backdrop for them, not a subject of interest. Their intellectual horizons remained narrow, despite the thousands of miles traveled. Travel rarely changed their views. Letters and diaries from that time are full of complaints about unbearable boredom and monotony. Behind the outward prosperity lay a deep inner emptiness. Unable to apply their abilities, people wasted their time on trifles. Life turned into a series of identical days. Endless card games and empty visits filled the intellectual void of their existence. These activities helped kill time, but did not bring satisfaction. It was a tragedy of unrealized potential for an entire generation of gifted people. Their abilities never found an outlet. Wealth gave them access to the best libraries, but social norms forbade them from using them. Books became part of the interior decor rather than a source of knowledge. You could own rare books, but you had no right to discuss their contents openly. Knowledge had to remain hidden. Intellectual life went underground, hiding behind a facade of impeccable social manners. Reflections and doubts were kept private or shared only within a small circle. This created a deep sense of loneliness among those who wanted to know more. They felt like strangers among their own people. Thus, the Victorian elite voluntarily limited their minds for the sake of preserving peace. Fear of change proved stronger than curiosity. They feared new ideas more than disease or financial losses in business. Stability was bought at the price of rejecting progress and lively human thought. It was a quiet intellectual prison with very expensive and beautiful walls. The life of a member of the elite did not belong to him from the moment he was born. His fate began to take shape long before he could consciously choose anything. He was just another link in the endless chain of generations of his noble family. His name, title, and the past achievements of his family determined his future from the cradle. From childhood, the child was taught that he was responsible not only for himself. The expectations of parents and ancestors weighed heavily on each child, demanding the continuation of centuries-old traditions. Any deviation from the planned path was perceived as a threat to the family heritage. You had to surpass your father's successes to be considered a worthy person. The choice of future profession and place of residence was the subject of lengthy negotiations between families. These decisions were made behind closed doors without the child's involvement. The child's personal inclinations were rarely taken into account when planning their long journey. The main considerations were profit, status, and benefit to the family. You could dream of science, travel, or art, but you were obliged to manage the family estate or continue the family business. You were expected to accept your role without complaint. The son of a military hero had no right to become an artist without scandal and rupture. Marriage was more of a commercial and political transaction than a union of two loving hearts. It was seen as an important step in strengthening the family's position. Families combined their capital and influence without asking the opinion of the main participants in this union. Personal consent was considered secondary. Girls were perceived as commodities at a bride market, where dowry and pedigree were valued. They were raised with the idea of a profitable marriage as the main goal in life. Feelings were considered a dangerous obstacle to a profitable and lasting marriage. Love could ruin everything and jeopardize the calculations of adults. People felt obliged to uphold the prestige of their family name, even at the cost of their own happiness. They were expected to behave impeccably in any situation. The failure of one family member instantly cast a shadow on all of their numerous relatives. Mistakes were not forgiven. This created an atmosphere of collective responsibility and constant mutual fear of making mistakes. Every action was discussed and evaluated in terms of its usefulness to the family. You did not live for yourself, but to preserve the prestige of your ancient family. Personal opinion was almost irrelevant. The fear of letting down one's ancestors was a powerful incentive to obey all the strict rules of life. It forced people to obey even when it caused pain. But this same fear gave rise to a deep and hidden unhappiness that could not be shown. Showing weakness was considered unacceptable. Young people often felt that they were merely instruments for preserving accumulated capital. They were evaluated according to their usefulness, not their inner world. Their personalities dissolved into the interests of the family and future, unborn heirs. Their own desires were pushed into the background. Younger sons often found themselves in an even more difficult position than their older brothers. They were not expected to continue the family line, but they were not given any freedom either. They received no inheritance and were forced to seek their fortune in the army or the church. Their choices were limited and not always desirable. At the same time, they had to maintain the lifestyle of a gentleman without having the means to do so. They were expected to maintain an outward appearance of splendor without financial support. This led to eternal dependence on their older brother and bitterness about their humiliating position. Pride had to be combined with need. Daughters were deprived of the right to inherit real estate and most of the family's financial assets. Their future depended directly on the decisions of men. Their only chance for a prosperous life was to marry a rich man. In this matter, there was no time for mistakes. If this did not happen, they became poor relatives dependent on their brothers. Their position was unstable and humiliating. This uncertainty about the future created constant tension and anxiety in their souls. Women lived in anticipation of the decision of their fate. Family archives and portraits of ancestors in the corridors were a constant reminder of duty. The house itself became a symbol of obligation. You could not forget your responsibility for a single hour of your life. Even rest was accompanied by a feeling of guilt. The faces in the paintings seemed to follow your every step and questionable action. The past was always present. The dynastic pressure did not ease even after you became the head of the family. Now you yourself became part of that pressure. Many could not withstand this pressure and tried to escape from their golden cage. This decision required enormous inner strength. They left for colonies or associated with people outside their circle. Sometimes this was the only way to feel alive. Such actions led to a complete break in ties and the loss of all financial support. The family perceived this as betrayal. Freedom cost the loss of everything a person had known and loved since childhood. The price was too high for most. The dynastic burden turned life into the fulfillment of an endless debt to the dead. Past generations seemed to dictate terms to the living. The present was sacrificed to the past for the sake of illusory greatness in the distant future. Personal happiness was not considered a value. It was a life of inertia, devoid of freshness, and the right to make one's own unique mistakes. Any deviation from the norm was punished with condemnation. Victorian gold was paid for with the loss of the right to be oneself. Behind the luxury lay a deep and silent lack of freedom. In summary, it can be said that wealth in that era was a form of social slavery. The owners of fortunes lived in conditions of chronic stress and constant physical discomfort. They paid for their position with a complete lack of freedom of choice in personal life. The illusion of grandeur required daily sacrifices and incredible patience on the part of everyone. The Victorian elite were hostages to a system that placed formal order above human happiness. We see stern faces in old photographs, and not just because of the photography technique. The eyes of these people reflect the burden of long years lived according to someone else's script. Understanding this side of history allows us to look differently at the glamour of a bygone era. True greatness required the renunciation of simple human joys, accessible even to the poorest. The right to call oneself the master of the world in that period was too costly for the soul. People turned into monuments to themselves while still alive. Wealth was not a reward, but a difficult test that not everyone could pass. The system was so strong that it was almost impossible to resist it alone. You either accepted the rules of the game or found yourself on the sidelines of the empire's social life. Most chose comfort and status, paying for it with their inner freedom. Only a few found the strength to remain human in this world of mass. The Victorian era left us with great architectural monuments and masterpieces of world literature, but it also left us with the memory of how dangerous it is to suppress human nature. We must remember these sufferings so that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past today. Gold can never replace the warmth of human communication and freedom of thought. Today, we can only guess at what people felt in those luxurious halls. Their diaries are often full of bitterness that they could not express aloud to their friends. This hidden drama of high society remains one of the most interesting mysteries of history. The life of the elite was a grand spectacle in which the actors themselves believed in their roles. Huge mansions have now been turned into museums where tourists admire beautiful antique furniture. Few people think about how cold and lonely it was to live within these walls. Every detail of the interior was paid for with someone's suppressed desire or unfulfilled dream. The beauty of the Victorian style has a very bitter and salty taste of tears. Victorian wealth did indeed go hand in hand with constant and profound suffering. It was a grand experiment in creating an ideal society through harsh violence against the individual. Its results show us that external prosperity does not guarantee inner peace. We must cherish our ability to be sincere and free in our feelings. Behind the facade of brick and stone were real people with their own pains and hopes. Their lives were filled with struggles that are rarely written about in ordinary school textbooks. Our story is a tribute to those who suffered in their golden cages. May their experience serve as a reminder of the true values of human existence. We conclude our dive into the world of hidden suffering and golden cages of the Victorian era. What do you think was the most unbearable thing for people of that time from the list in this issue? Was it the physical pain of tight clothing or the psychological pressure of strict etiquette? Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on new exciting investigations into the mysteries of history.